The sound of Grandma's urn hitting the wet stone sounded exactly like something inside me breaking with it. For 1 second, I couldn't move. Then the ceramic cracked. Gray ash spilled across my patio and into the rainwater gathering between the pavers. No. The word barely came out. Then I was on my knees. No, no, no. I cupped both hands around the nearest patch of ash, trying to keep the water from carrying it toward the grass. My palms scraped against the stone. Mud collected beneath my fingernails. The ashes stuck to my skin, then dissolved into gray streaks that slipped between my fingers no matter how tightly I tried to hold them. Rainwater was already running toward the flower bed. I pushed my hands against the ground like I could build a wall around what was left of her. Grandma Ruth. The woman who had wrapped me in one of her old cardigans when I was 7 and convinced I wasn't ugly just because another girl at school had said I was. The woman who always saved me the chair beside her at Thanksgiving. The woman who, for most of my adult life, asked me one question nobody else in my family seemed to remember to ask. Megan, are you okay? And now, I was 41 years old, kneeling in the rain outside the house I had bought with my own savings, trying to stop my grandmother from washing into the yard, because my sister wanted my house. Behind me, Paige was breathing hard. If I can't have the house, she said, then you can live with this. I twisted around. She was standing beneath the edge of the patio roof, her blonde hair damp around her face, one hand still raised from throwing the urn. My mother stared at the broken pieces. My father stared at me. I pushed myself up and moved toward what remained of the urn. Dad grabbed my arm. Not Paige's, mine. Megan, stop. Let go of me. Don't make this worse. For a moment, I just looked at his hand around my elbow. I have spent 14 years mediating workplace disputes for people who insist they had no choice. Managers who say they had to raise their voices. Employees who say they had to retaliate. People who explain their actions as though the only available alternative was whatever they happened to do. There is almost always another choice. My father had one then. He could have moved toward Paige. He could have told her to leave. He could have helped me collect what was left of his own mother. Instead, he held me. Let go, I said again. He did. My mother exhaled as if I were the difficult one. Everyone is upset. I stared at her. Paige just threw Grandma's ashes into my yard. She shouldn't have done that. That's it? What do you want me to say? I looked down. The rain had darkened the stone around the broken urn. Mom followed my eyes and gave a small shrug. She's dead, Megan. It's not a big deal. Something inside me went very quiet. Not calm, quiet. There is a difference. Paige crossed her arms. This wouldn't have happened if you'd stopped being selfish about the house. I turned toward her. My house? You know exactly what I mean. No. I'd really like to hear you say it. Her jaw tightened. Grandma wanted things to be fair. Grandma never owned this house. She helped you get it. No, she didn't. Mom told me what Grandma did for you. That stopped me. Not because Paige sounded convincing. Because she sounded certain. I had heard my sister lie before. She usually over-explained, added details nobody had asked for, looked toward Mom before finishing a sentence. This time, she looked straight at me. I said, "Get off my property." Mom blinked. Megan. All three of you. You're emotional. Yes. I pointed toward the side gate. And you're leaving. Dad rubbed his forehead. Can we just slow down? No. Megan. No. I had spent most of my life making my refusal sound like a negotiation. No. But maybe. No. Unless you really need me. No. Not today. But send me the paperwork. This one had no second half. Leave. Paige laughed once under her breath. Unbelievable. I didn't answer. Dad finally put a hand near Mom's shoulder and guided her toward the gate. Paige followed, muttering something I didn't care enough to hear. My mother's handbag was still on the patio table. She came back for it. When she lifted it, her key ring slid partly out of the side pocket. The brass spare key to my house hung beside her grocery store loyalty card. I had given Mom and Dad that key when Grandma moved in with me. Family should always be able to get in. That was what Mom had said. I had believed her. After they left, I locked the door. Then I went back outside. I called June Carter. June had known Grandma for more than 30 years. They met at church, argued about hydrangeas, and spent most Tuesday mornings drinking coffee so weak I once accused them of reusing the same grounds from 1998. She arrived 15 minutes later, wearing rain boots and carrying gardening gloves, 2 clean containers, and a roll of paper towels. She didn't say, "Oh my God." She didn't ask what Paige had been thinking. She took one look at me, kneeling beside the patio, and said, "Do you want me to stay?" That nearly undid me. I nodded. We worked quietly. There wasn't a dignified way to do it. That was the part I hated most. I used a small plastic scraper from my gardening bench to lift what I could from the wet stone. June held one container steady. We kept anything mixed with obvious mud separate. Neither of us pretended we could restore what had happened. At one point, I stopped and stared at my gray palms. I should call somebody. June looked at me. The police? I don't know. That was the truth. I knew enough to understand that human remains weren't ordinary property, and that intentionally mishandling them could have legal consequences depending on what exactly happened and how local law treated it. I also knew enough not to invent a criminal statute in my head because I was angry. I could photograph the scene, preserve messages, get proper advice later if I chose to. So that was what I did. 3 photographs. The broken urn, the patio, the yard. Then I put my phone away and went back to Grandma. By the time we finished, my knees were soaked through. June stood beside me at the kitchen sink while I washed my hands. "Do you want me to make tea?" I stared at the water swirling gray for half a second before it cleared. "No." "Want me to talk?" "No." She nodded. I dried my hands. "Thank you." She squeezed my shoulder once. When she left, the house was silent. Grandma had lived there for 2 years before she died. She had complained about the kitchen faucet, praised the porch swing, and insisted the downstairs bathroom needed a brighter light because, in her words, nobody over 70 should have to pee in a cave. I had put in the brighter light. I had also installed grab bars, replaced the back steps, widened the path to the garden, and moved my office upstairs so she could have the downstairs room. Not because she bought me the house. She hadn't. I bought it 6 years earlier. At the time, the place cost just over $520,000, which had felt like a terrifying amount of money. I had saved for the down payment for years. My name was on the mortgage. My name was on the deed. Over the next 6 years, I replaced the roof, updated old electrical work, renovated the kitchen in stages, improved the insulation, and rebuilt the backyard drainage after learning the hard way what one Richmond thunderstorm could do to a poorly graded lot. I had put close to $90,000 into the house. The neighborhood had changed around me too. Old houses were being renovated. Restaurants moved in. 3 homes within walking distance had recently sold for amounts that made me check the listings twice. The most recent estimate on mine put it around $800,000. That number had fascinated Paige from the moment she heard it, but Grandma had never paid $1 toward the purchase. I went upstairs and pulled my closing folder from the fireproof cabinet. My profession has ruined me for decorative filing systems. I don't own linen boxes labeled memories. I own folders labeled by year. The closing statement was exactly where it should have been, 6 years ago. My savings account. My mortgage. My signature. I flipped through the paperwork until an old printed page slipped sideways. It wasn't financial. It was a screenshot of a text exchange I had printed with the closing documents because it made me happy at the time. "Mom, you worked hard for this place. Ruth is proud of you." I sat down on the floor beside the cabinet. At that point, Grandma hadn't even moved in with me. She had still been living in her apartment. Mom knew. Of course she knew. So why was Paige standing in my backyard years later, saying Grandma had helped me get the house? My phone buzzed. Family group chat. "Mom, last night got out of hand. Everyone is grieving. No one meant for anyone to get hurt." I read it twice. No one meant for anyone to get hurt. Paige had thrown an urn. That sentence required an impressive amount of editing. Then Paige added, "You've always acted like that house is yours alone when Grandma helped you get it." I started typing, deleted it, typed again, deleted that too. At work, when 2 people gave incompatible accounts, I didn't begin by arguing with either one. I built a timeline, so I opened the Notes app. Thursday, 6:14 p.m. Paige brought up house. 619, I stated. Grandma never owned. Funded house. 621, Paige said. Mom told her. Grandma helped me get it. 622, urn thrown. Dad restrained me when I moved toward Paige. Urn. Mom, she's dead. It's not a big deal. I saved it. Memory gets softer. Timestamps don't. The next morning, I went to work. My name is Megan Hale. I'm 41, and I'm an employee relations mediator for a regional utility company, which sounds more dramatic than it usually is. Most days involve policy questions, bad communication, conflicting recollections, and adults discovering that putting something in an email makes it harder to pretend they never said it. That morning, I sat between a maintenance supervisor named Carl and an employee named Dennis. Carl said Dennis had refused an instruction. Dennis said Carl had threatened his job. Both statements sounded serious. Neither was specific enough to act on. What exactly did you say? I asked Carl. He shifted in his chair. I told him the assignment needed to be finished. What were the words? A pause. I said, if you can't do the work, maybe we need someone who can. I wrote that down. Then I asked Dennis what he had said immediately before that. By the end of 40 minutes, the problem looked different from either opening statement. Not harmless. Just more accurate. After they left, my colleague Tara leaned against my doorway. You look terrible. Thank you. I meant tired. Much better. She smiled. Then her expression softened. Family? I looked at her. She knew enough about my life to know that was usually the correct category. Family. Want to talk? Not yet. She nodded. Tara was good at stopping when someone said no. It was one of the reasons I liked her. Before leaving, she tapped the posting pinned beside my desk. You know the regional employee relations lead position closes next month. I know. You should apply. It has travel. 2 or 3 days a month. That can become complicated. She gave me a look. Complicated for whom? I didn't answer. She left. My phone lit up again. Not Mom. A calendar reminder. Ruth Hale Memorial Scholarship Dinner, final vendor confirmations due. I closed my eyes. 4 years earlier, after Grandma died, Mom had helped start a small scholarship in her name for 2 graduating seniors from the church community. Mom was chair. I handled operations, venue, invoices, vendor deadlines, travel timing, seating, volunteer schedules. All the invisible little pieces that made an event appear effortless. Mom handled the public side. Donor letters, biographies, speeches. The language, that division had always made sense. She liked being in front of people. I liked making sure the caterer had the correct head count. My phone rang. Mom. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I remembered the 2 scholarship recipients who had nothing to do with Paige. I answered. What? A pause. Then Mom said, can you still handle Saturday? That was her first question. Not how are you? Not did you sleep? Not what can I do? Can you still handle Saturday? I looked at my desk. At the investigation notes from my morning meeting. At Tara's job posting. At my own handwriting from the night before. I'll finish what I already committed to, I said. Mom exhaled. Good. Nothing new. Another pause. What does that mean? It means exactly what I said. Megan, this event is for your grandmother. I know. She wouldn't want us fighting. There it was. Grandma, converted into a management tool. I'll finish my commitments, I repeated. Nothing new. Mom's voice cooled. Fine. She hung up. 48 hours after Paige shattered Grandma's urn, my parents came to my front door. It was just after 7. I saw them through the glass and didn't open immediately. Dad looked exhausted. Mom looked like she had been crying. When I finally opened the door halfway, neither tried to come in. Megan, Dad said. What? Mom started speaking too fast. The venue changed the load-in window. Grace says there's a problem with the donor packet. One of the students hasn't confirmed the travel schedule, and Paige can't find the vendor spreadsheet. I stared at her. She stopped. You came here because of the dinner. It's Grandma's dinner. It's a scholarship dinner. You know what I mean. I began closing the door. Mom reached toward it but didn't touch me. Please. Dad lowered himself onto the front step, Partly because Mom was crying, and partly because I think he could see I was done standing there. "Megan," he said, "please. We don't know how you set all of this up." For years, I had wanted my family to notice how much I did. It was strange how little satisfaction there was in hearing them admit it at my front door. Mom's voice cracked. "Save this for your grandmother." I looked at both of them. "I'll save the event." Mom nodded immediately. "But I'm not saving the story you're telling about what happened." Her face tightened. "We aren't telling a story. That's the problem. You always think your version is just what happened." Neither answered. I opened the door enough to step outside. "I'll fix the logistics. Then we're done for tonight." Mom looked past me into the house. For the first time, I noticed she had probably reached for her spare key before ringing the bell. I wondered how many times she had let herself in over the years without thinking of it as access I had granted. I wondered when a favor became a right. That night, I opened the memorial files. Grace had emailed the donor packet with a note. "Sorry, looks like the PDF merged the wrong bio page. Can you confirm which version goes to print?" Normally, I would have skipped straight to the page numbers and vendor specs. Content was Mom's territory. But because the packet had merged incorrectly, I opened the entire PDF. I found Grandma's biography on page 7, 3 paragraphs about her church work, one about the scholarship, then a sentence about me. I read it once, then again. Ruth's generosity helped her granddaughter Megan secure the home where Ruth would later spend her final years surrounded by family. My hand went still on the mouse. I checked the footer. Version date: 3 years old. I emailed Grace. "Who supplied this wording originally?" She responded 10 minutes later. "Elaine. It's been in the master bio since the second scholarship dinner." "Why?" I didn't answer. I opened my closing folder again. Then Mom's old text. "You worked hard for this place. Ruth is proud of you." 2 records. 2 stories. 1 mother. Paige hadn't invented the lie in my backyard. She had inherited it. And someone had been building it for her for years. Someone had been building that story for years. The next morning, Grace sent me the revision history from the scholarship committee's shared drive. There was nothing dramatic about it. No hidden folder. No deleted file someone had miraculously recovered. Just the kind of ordinary digital trail people create when they assume nobody will ever need to look backward. The earliest version, containing the sentence about Grandma helping me secure my house, had been uploaded 3 years earlier. Under "submitted by" was my mother's name, Elaine Hale. For a while, the cursor blinked beside Grace's last message. "That wording came from your mom. She handles all the bios and donor copy. Is something wrong with it?" The answer could have filled several pages. Instead, I wrote, "I need to verify one factual detail before anything goes to print. Please don't change the master copy yet." Grace replied with a thumbs up. That was all. No rescue. No grand revelation. Just a source. At work, a source was where a claim stopped floating and became something you could examine. So I called Mom during lunch. She answered on the second ring. "Did you get the donor packet fixed?" Not hello. Not how are you. Yes. Good. Grace was worried. "There's something else." A pause. "What?" "The biography says Grandma's generosity helped me secure my house." Another pause. Shorter this time. "So, where did that come from?" Mom said. "Megan, not this again." "It hasn't been again for me. I saw it for the first time last night. It's just wording. It's a factual claim. It's how everyone remembers it." That sentence caught my attention more than if she had simply lied. At work, people used words like "everyone" when they didn't want to name a source. Everyone thinks you're difficult. Everyone knows what happened. Everyone agrees. Usually, everyone became 1 or 2 people once you started asking names. "Who is everyone?" I asked. "You know what I mean." "No. Who specifically remembers Grandma helping me buy my house?" Mom's irritation sharpened. "Why are you interrogating me?" "Because you wrote it." I wrote a biography for a memorial dinner. I wasn't preparing a mortgage application. That doesn't answer the question. She exhaled through her nose. Your grandmother helped you. Maybe not by writing a check at closing, but she helped you. How? She supported you. She encouraged you. Later she lived there. You benefited from having her there too. The logic shifted underneath the conversation. First, Grandma had helped me get the house. Now emotional encouragement counted as financial assistance. Then Grandma living with me somehow counted as a benefit to me. The wording could move indefinitely as long as Mom never had to admit the original statement was wrong. Did Grandma ever tell you she paid toward my purchase? That isn't what I said. Did she? Megan, I have things to do. So do I. Then stop turning every sentence into a deposition. Her voice had changed. That told me enough for the moment. I'll send Grace corrected wording. No. The speed of that answer surprised me. No? The bio has been fine for years. It contains a claim about me that isn't true. It honors your grandmother. It gives her credit for buying part of my house. You are being painfully literal. Accuracy tends to be literal. Mom went quiet. Then she said, "This is exactly what I'm talking about. Paige is emotional, you're rigid, and somehow I'm always expected to stand in the middle." There it was again. Paige felt. I documented. Mom suffered between us. Nobody had to ask how the system ended up there. I'm correcting the sentence, I said. You always have to keep score. No, I'm checking a fact. That's the same thing with you. She hung up. For the rest of lunch, the untouched half of my sandwich sat beside my keyboard, while the donor biography stayed open on my second monitor. The sentence looked small. That bothered me. Most damaging stories didn't arrive with flashing lights around them. They became background. Something repeated enough times that eventually nobody remembered there had ever been another version. 3 years. That meant Paige had heard it long before she stood in my backyard. And the longer I looked at the sentence, the more another thought bothered me. If Mom had rewritten how I got the house, what else had she rewritten about the years Grandma lived there? That evening, I opened one of the boxes I had packed after Grandma died. A translucent pill organizer sat near the top, Monday through Sunday, morning and evening. One of the compartments still had a faded strip of blue tape on it from the weeks when Grandma's medications kept changing. The sight of it brought back the smell of peppermint tea and the soft click of her walker against my downstairs hallway. During her last 2 years, my weekdays had developed a second schedule beneath the one on my work calendar. Wake at 5:30. Check that Grandma had slept. Coffee. Breakfast for both of us. Medication. Work. Phone call at lunch. Appointment after work when necessary. Dinner. Paperwork. Laundry. A second medication check. On difficult nights, I slept on the sofa outside her room because she hated the idea of being watched, but was frightened of falling on the way to the bathroom. She never asked me to do all of it. That distinction mattered. Grandma would apologize for needing help, which sometimes made me more determined to make the help feel ordinary. One Saturday, after I had spent most of the morning installing a shower chair and reorganizing the bathroom cabinet, Paige arrived carrying a bouquet of white tulips and a bakery box. Grandma lit up. "Well, look at you." Paige kissed her cheek. "I brought your favorite." She arranged the flowers in the blue vase near the window, photographed them, then took a picture with Grandma. Mom commented on the photo online less than an hour later. "My girls take such good care of their grandmother." At the time, I had simply stared at that sentence and felt strangely grateful. My girls. Plural. Included. I hadn't cared that nobody could see the receipts from the hardware store or the appointment schedule taped inside the pantry. Being counted had felt like enough. Now, sitting on my bedroom floor with the old medication organizer in my lap, the memory changed shape. Paige's flowers had been real affection. I didn't need to make them meaningless to make my work matter. That was the trap I had fallen into for years. Whenever I noticed the imbalance, I told myself someone else's contribution counted too. And it did. The problem was mine had become infrastructure. Nobody thanked a wall for holding up a roof. They only noticed when it stopped. The next few days made that impossible to ignore. Dad forwarded me an insurance renewal with the subject line, "Can you take a look?" Mom texted a photograph of water staining the ceiling in their laundry room. "Which contractor did you use last year? Can you call him?" You know what questions to ask. Paige left a voicemail about a dispute with her landlord. "Mom said you'd know what to say. Just call me when you get this." 3 different requests. 3 different areas of their lives. All routed to me automatically. For years, Mom had a phrase for it. The person who can handle it should handle it. The first time she said it, I had been 27 and helping Dad appeal a billing mistake. It sounded like respect. By 35, it meant reviewing insurance. By 38, it meant arranging Grandma's care. By 41, apparently it meant my sister could throw human remains into the rain and I would still be expected to call her landlord. That afternoon, I answered Dad's email with the customer service number printed on the renewal. Mom received the contractor's name but not a phone call made on her behalf. Paige got nothing. The discomfort surprised me. Not because their requests were difficult, because refusing to complete them made my body behave as if I had forgotten something important. My fingers kept drifting toward my phone. It would have taken 10 minutes to call the contractor. Maybe 15 to explain Paige's lease problem. That was how it had always worked. No single request was large enough to justify saying no. Only the accumulated years were large. And nobody ever asked for the accumulated years at once. June came by on Thursday afternoon to help me check a box of old memorial photographs before the scholarship dinner. The committee wanted several pictures of Grandma projected during dessert. One showed Grandma sitting on my front porch, wrapped in a red blanket, laughing at something outside the frame. June smiled. I took that. You did? First fall after Ruth moved in. That made me look up. You remember when she moved? June gave me a strange look. Of course. Was I already living here? Megan, I know the answer. I want to know what you remember. She set the photograph down. You'd been here a while. More than a year, I think. Why do you remember? Because Ruth wouldn't stop talking about the house when you bought it. A laugh escaped June. She told half the church you'd done it yourself. She was especially impressed that you bought an old house without anyone talking you into one of those places where every front door looks identical. That sounded exactly like Grandma. Did she ever tell you she helped pay for it? June frowned. No, I waited. She didn't fill the silence with speculation. That was one of the reasons I trusted her. Finally, she asked, is that what Elaine is saying? The scholarship biography says Grandma's generosity helped me secure the house. June's mouth tightened. I never heard Ruth say that. Thank you. For what? For telling me what you know instead of what you think happened. June studied me for a moment. You do that for work, don't you? Constantly. Must be exhausting to need it at home. That landed harder than I expected. The photograph remained between us. Grandma in the red blanket. My porch behind her. A house she had loved. A house she had not bought. The rehearsal for the scholarship dinner was Saturday morning. Paige arrived 20 minutes late carrying coffee for Mom. Nothing for anyone else. She moved around me for the first half hour, as though the two of us were co-workers who had disagreed about a seating chart. Eventually, while Grace tested the projector and Mom spoke with the caterer, Paige approached the end of the table where I was checking name cards. You're really going to ignore me forever? I kept sorting. I'm working. I came over to say something. Then say it. She folded her arms. I shouldn't have thrown the urn. My hands stopped. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was closer than anything she had said since the backyard. Paige continued. I was grieving. So was I. I thought you got the house because of Grandma. That sentence made me lift my head. You thought that when? What? When did you think Grandma helped me get the house? She looked toward Mom, who was across the room. Then back at me. That's what I was always told. Did you still believe it when you threw the ashes? Her expression changed. I don't know what I was thinking. That wasn't my question. I said I was upset. Paige. God, Megan, this is why nobody can talk to you. Everything has to be exact. Exact. Literal. Keeping score. Different phrases for the same request. Stop making us hold our story still long enough for you to examine it. Paige picked up her coffee. I said I shouldn't have done it. You did. What more do you want? The truth would be a start. Her face hardened. Then she walked away. I watched her join Mom near the stage. Mom touched Paige's arm and said something I couldn't hear. Whatever it was, I didn't pretend to know. That mattered. The old version of me would have filled in the blanks. Mom is calming her down. Mom is telling her I'm difficult. Mom is taking her side. Maybe any of those were true. Maybe none were. Facts were enough. And I already had one. Paige had claimed she still believed Grandma helped me get the house when she threw the urn. But something about that conversation had bothered me. A few days earlier, she had used the words legally yours. I remembered because they had irritated me. That evening, back home, I searched our text thread. House. Deed. Grandma. The messages went back months. Then I found the exchange. 6 days before the ashes hit my patio. Paige had sent me a listing for a house outside Richmond with a string of angry emojis. Can you believe what places cost now? I had replied. That's why I'm not giving mine away. She wrote, you act like Grandma didn't make it possible. Apparently tired of the argument, even then, I had sent her a screenshot of the county parcel record and a photograph of my closing statement. My message beneath it was painfully clear. Grandma never owned or funded this house. I bought it before she moved in. Please stop saying otherwise. Paige's response sat directly below. I know it's in your name. That's not the point. My stomach tightened. There was more. Mom says legally yours doesn't mean morally yours. For several seconds, the room seemed to narrow around the screen. Not because the message proved Mom had ordered Paige to do anything. It didn't. Not because it proved some elaborate plan. There wasn't one. It proved something simpler. Paige knew the ownership story was false before she threw the ashes. She had already been shown the record. The argument had survived the facts by changing categories. Once, Grandma helped you buy it, stopped working. The claim became, you may own it legally, but we own the moral right to decide what you do with it. That was harder to argue against because it had no boundary. No document could satisfy it. No payment record could end it. I scrolled farther. One message from Paige appeared 3 lines below. I remembered reading it at the time and dismissing it as another jab. Now it felt different. Mom says you always come around once there's something important to save. My thumb rested against the edge of the phone. The scholarship dinner. Dad's insurance. Mom's contractor. Paige's landlord. Grandma's appointments. The house was the loudest demand they had ever made. It wasn't the first. For years, every argument ended at the same place. Something became urgent. Someone needed help. Then everyone waited for me to become useful again. That was the part I hadn't understood. They weren't only expecting me to forgive them. They were expecting me to return to work. They were expecting me to return to work. That thought followed me into Monday morning. Not work at the utility company. That job came with a title, a paycheck, an office, and people who understood that if they wanted something from me, they had to put it on a calendar. The other job had none of those things. No title. No hours. No end date. Just a lifetime of people saying, Megan will know what to do. By 9:30, I had a blank spreadsheet open on one monitor and the records I had collected on the other. At the top, I typed 5 headings: claim, date, source, contradiction, what I actually know. It was the same basic structure I used when workplace complaints became tangled in memory and emotion, not because people were always lying. Most weren't. People remembered what hurt them. They remembered what justified them. They remembered the part of an argument that made sense from where they had been standing. Records helped separate memory from meaning. The first line was simple. Claim. Grandma helped me buy the house. The closing documents showed otherwise. The old text from Mom showed she knew otherwise. The donor biography showed she had later presented a different version. The message from Paige showed she had been given the real ownership information 6 days before she threw the urn. Then I added Dad's old email. I had forgotten about it until I searched my inbox for the address. 2 years after I bought the house, a storm damaged part of the roof. Dad had emailed me the name of a contractor. Might be worth calling him about the place you bought. He did good work for us. The place you bought. Nothing dramatic. Nothing anyone would frame and put in a safe. Just another small record proving the truth had once been ordinary. Tara appeared in my doorway sometime before lunch, carrying 2 coffees. She placed one beside my keyboard. You have the face. What face? The one you make when somebody has handed you 6 versions of the same meeting. That specific? I've worked with you for 8 years. She glanced at the spreadsheet but didn't step closer. I minimized the documents. Sorry. You don't have to be. Tara nodded toward the screen. You building a timeline? Something like that. Work? No. Her eyebrows rose slightly. Family? Unfortunately. She took a sip of coffee. Can I say something without knowing the details? That depends entirely on what you're about to say. You spend your entire career telling managers they can't call 5 years of undocumented labor just helping when it benefits them. The cup stopped halfway to my mouth. Tara noticed. I hit something. Maybe. She lifted one shoulder. Then I'll leave it there. She did. For the next several minutes, I stared at the spreadsheet without touching the keyboard. 5 years of undocumented labor. The phrase felt ridiculous applied to my parents. Then I started thinking about what I had done the previous month alone. Dad's insurance renewal, Mom's contractor estimate, the scholarship dinner, a pharmacy billing question, a tax document Mom couldn't locate, 2 calls from Paige about her lease. None of those things took very long. That had always been my excuse. 10 minutes here, 20 minutes there, an hour on Sunday. One afternoon because Dad hated phone menus. Another because Mom said customer service representatives listened better when I called. No single request looked like exploitation. Put together, they looked like a position nobody had ever bothered to name. That evening I called Dad. He answered with, "Hey Meg, can I ask you something?" "Sir, did you ever believe Grandma paid for my house?" There was no long pause. No. The answer came so quickly that my hand tightened around the phone. Never. No, why would I? Mom wrote in Grandma's scholarship biography that Grandma's generosity helped me secure it. Dad said. I know there was some wording about that. You knew? I knew your mother talked about Ruth helping you. She didn't help me buy the house. I know. The kitchen around me seemed to sharpen. The hum of the refrigerator. The faint tick from the wall clock. My own thumbnail pressing into the edge of the counter. Then why didn't you correct it? It wasn't supposed to mean she wrote you a check. That's what helped me secure the home means to most people. You know your mother. She likes things to sound nice. Dad. All right. His voice lowered. She thought Paige needed to feel like Ruth had done something for her too. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. It did to your mother. What did my house have to do with Paige feeling remembered? Another pause. She thought Paige saw you as getting the house and getting the years with Ruth. I didn't get the house from Ruth. I know. There it was again. I need you to hear the sentence you keep saying. What sentence? You knew. Dad exhaled. Megan, nobody thought this would turn into Paige demanding your property. But you knew the story wasn't accurate. I didn't think it mattered. Until Paige used it to justify throwing Grandma's ashes into my yard. His breathing changed. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. Then Dad said, about that night. What about it? I wasn't helping Paige. I didn't say you were. You've been acting like I held you back so she could keep going. I never said that either. He stopped. The distinction mattered. I wasn't going to accuse him of an intention I couldn't know. Dad continued. You moved toward her. The urn was already falling apart. I thought you two were about to start grabbing at each other. I reached for whoever was closest. That was me. Yes. You told me not to make it worse. I was trying to stop a fight. You stopped the person reacting to what happened. That wasn't how it felt in the moment. Maybe not. My voice stayed level. But that's what you did. He didn't answer. There was no clean resolution. No revelation that made Dad innocent. He hadn't wanted Grandma's ashes in the rain. He hadn't planned what Paige did. But when chaos arrived, he had chosen the person easiest to restrain. Me. That pattern was beginning to feel familiar. Before we hung up, Dad said quietly, your mother didn't think Paige would take any of this so literally. I looked at the donor biography still open on my laptop. Mom keeps accusing me of being too literal. Dad gave a tired little laugh. I didn't. Words get expensive when everyone else is expected to live by them, I said. After the call, another line went into the chronology. Not because Dad was evidence against Mom. Because his answer narrowed what I could honestly say. He had never believed Grandma funded the house. He knew Mom's version was inaccurate. He let it stand, because correcting it would have created tension. That was a choice. 2 days later, June and I met at a coffee shop to sort the final photographs for the scholarship display. Halfway through, she paused over a picture of Mom, at about 19. Grandma stood beside her, much younger, both of them wearing matching aprons at what looked like a church bake sale. "Your mother hated that apron," June said. I smiled despite myself. She still hates aprons. She hated everything that made her look like somebody's helper. Something in June's tone made me look up. "What do you mean?" She studied the photograph. "Ruth told me once that Elaine had to do a lot when she was young. More than the others." "What kind of things?" "Caregiving, mostly. Ruth's older sister got sick for a long stretch. Your mother was 17, maybe 18. The brothers were away more, and Elaine was the one who stayed." June slid the photograph toward me. "Ruth said your mother used to say she lost years of her life doing whatever people decided she was good at." The word sat between us. The person who can handle it should handle it. Suddenly the sentence had a history. That didn't make it kinder. It made it sadder. "Did Grandma tell you that directly?" June nodded. "Yes, years ago." Later that evening, I called Dad again and asked only what June had told me. He confirmed the basics. Mom had spent much of her late teens helping care for a sick relative. She resented it, Dad said. I would too. She always said nobody noticed how much she did. That was the part that stayed with me. Mom knew exactly what invisible responsibility felt like. She had hated it. Somewhere along the way, instead of deciding nobody should be treated that way, she had decided the capable person was simply supposed to endure it better. Understanding that hurt more than blaming ignorance. On Sunday, Mom invited me to dinner. Paige wouldn't be there. That detail was included in the invitation as if it were a gift. I almost declined. Then Mom added, "Just dinner, no fighting. I made the chicken you like." For nearly an hour, the message sat unanswered. The embarrassing truth was that I wanted to go. Not because I had forgotten the backyard. Not because a meal could undo anything. Because a small, stubborn part of me still wanted my mother to look at me and say something she should have said years ago. I went. The chair beside Mom had been pulled out. Grandma's framed photograph sat in the center of the dining table. The roast chicken smelled like rosemary and lemon. Dad poured water. No folders were visible. For the first 20 minutes we talked about ordinary things. Weather. A neighbor selling her house. The scholarship dinner. Mom complimented the seating plan. I waited for the catch so hard that I almost felt guilty when none appeared. Then she looked at Grandma's photograph. "You know," she said, "you were the one she trusted most." My fork stopped. Mom continued. "She always felt safe with you." There it was, the sentence I had wanted. Not exactly the question Grandma used to ask me, but close enough to reach a part of me I thought I had protected. For one dangerous minute, everything softened. Mom reached across the table. "We don't have to keep doing this to each other." I looked at her hand near mine. "What does that mean?" "It means we stop fighting." "What changes?" "We stop talking about the house." "That's not the same as admitting it isn't yours to discuss." Her fingers withdrew slightly. "Megan, I am trying." Dad watched his plate. Mom took a breath. "Stay with us through the end of the year. Help me get the scholarship settled. Help your father get organized. We'll give you space about Paige. Nobody will bring up the house." It sounded reasonable. That was what frightened me. No transfer. No dramatic demand. Just help us. The old job, repackaged as reconciliation. Then Mom reached down beside her chair. A navy folder appeared on the table. "Your father's insurance company sent this." I stared at it. Mom gave me a careful smile. "This one should be easy for you." The room changed. Not physically. The chicken still smelled good. Grandma still smiled from the photograph. Dad still sat across from me. But the sentence my mother had given me minutes earlier suddenly had an invoice attached. "You were the one she trusted most. Therefore help us." Recognition in exchange for service. Again. I didn't touch the folder. "Take it home with you." Mom blinked. "You haven't even looked at it." "I'm not going to." "It's 10 minutes. Then Dad can spend 10 minutes on it." Dad looked up. Mom's expression tightened. "After everything we just talked about?" "Yes." "You're punishing us." "No. I'm declining a task." "That's what you call this?" "That's what it is." I stood. Mom's chair scraped back. "Megan, sit down." "No. You came here to work things out." "I came because I thought you wanted dinner with your daughter." Her face changed. For a second, neither of us had anything left to hide behind. Then Mom said, You are my daughter. The folder sat between us. I looked at it. I'm starting to understand that you and I mean different things by that. At home, I didn't turn on the television, didn't open my laptop, just stood in the kitchen and looked toward the pantry. The small brass hook near the door was empty, but I knew where the matching keys were. Mom had one. Dad had one. Years ago, when Grandma moved in, Mom had insisted it was practical. Family should always be able to get in. At the time, the key felt like trust. Now, I looked around the room and saw other forms of access. Dad's insurance file in my cabinet, Mom's contractor notes, a list of service numbers taped inside a drawer, old renewal reminders on my digital calendar, scholarship contacts, tax folders, pieces of their lives stored inside mine because at some point everyone had decided I was the safest place to put difficult things. The next morning, I opened a new spreadsheet. Responsibility. Owner. What I currently do. Next deadline. Handoff needed. End date. Dad's insurance went in first. Then contractor records. Scholarship logistics. Household service contacts. Tax organizer. Renewals. The list kept growing. Not because I was searching for grievances. Because I was finally naming jobs. By the time I exported the document that evening, it ran 11 pages. 11. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Then I did something that had nothing to do with Mom, Paige, Dad, Grandma, the house, or the scholarship. I emailed Tara. Can you send me the full posting for the regional lead position, including expected travel? Her reply came 9 minutes later. Absolutely. It's still open for 2 more weeks. The attachment sat in my inbox. For years, family stuff had been enough reason not to click. This time, I opened it. 3 days later, the transition document was ready. 30 days. Anything already promised would be completed. No new tasks. Every account owner would receive the relevant contacts. No passwords would be passed around. Each person could reset their own. Scholarship logistics would move to Grace and June after the dinner. Mom and Dad would take back responsibility for their household, insurance, scheduling, and paperwork. Paige would handle Paige. Before sending it, I called June. Not to ask permission. I wanted to hear myself explain it to someone who wasn't trying to change my mind. When I finished, June said, "Can I ask you one thing?" "Yes." "What part of all that work belongs to you because you chose it?" I looked at the document. "And what part belongs to you because nobody ever asked?" For a moment, I couldn't answer. Then I said, "The scholarship dinner is mine until it's finished." "Okay, Grandma's memories are mine." "Of course." "The rest?" My eyes moved down 11 pages. "The rest belongs to the people whose names are actually on it." June didn't congratulate me. She simply said, "Sounds clear." After we hung up, the email went to Mom and Dad. The transition document was attached. 30 days. No threats. No accusations. Just dates, responsibilities, contacts, and one sentence at the top. I will complete commitments already made. I will not take on new household or personal administrative responsibilities after today. Existing responsibilities will transition back to their owners over the next 30 days. Mom replied within 20 minutes. "You can be angry, but you don't get to resign from being our daughter." The old guilt arrived right on schedule. My chest tightened. For a moment, the cursor waited beneath her message, while every version of me I had ever been argued for one more compromise. Then, my hands moved. "I'm not resigning from being your daughter. I'm resigning from the job you attached to it." I read it once, then pressed send. The email stayed sent. That sounds obvious, but for the first few hours, it felt like an action I might somehow reverse just by regretting it hard enough. Mom did not answer again that night. Dad did. His message came shortly before 10. 30 days seems extreme. Can we talk tomorrow? My thumb hovered over the screen. For most of my life, can we talk? Meant the boundary had entered negotiations. A request became a discussion. A discussion became context. Context became guilt. Then the original no quietly disappeared. This time, the answer was simple. We can talk. The transition date won't change. Dad did not respond. The next morning, I sent Grace the final scholarship handoff schedule and copied June. Grace would take the vendor binder after the dinner. June had agreed to keep the volunteer contacts for the next cycle. Neither woman had been asked to absorb my entire role. The tasks were divided because that was what responsible transition looked like. The rest of the document went to Mom and Dad. Insurance contacts, household service companies, renewal dates, account numbers they already owned, instructions for resetting access where I had previously been the person who remembered how. No passwords, no hidden safety net. At the bottom of every section was the same date, 30 days from my original email. My hands were steady when I sent it. They were less steady when the requests started. Mom texted before lunch. The laundry room ceiling looks worse. Can you call the contractor and explain what happened last time? I replied. His number is in the transition packet under home maintenance. 10 minutes later, I know where the number is. I'm asking if you can call because he listens to you. The old version of me could already hear the contractor's voice, could picture the questions, could solve it faster than Mom could explain the situation. That was the dangerous part. Not that the work was impossible. That it was easy. I'm not taking on new tasks. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, returned. Unbelievable. I put the phone face down. That afternoon, Dad forwarded a pharmacy plan notice with no message in the body. Usually, that was enough. He sent a document. I interpreted the document. No request required. The attachment remained unopened. An hour later, another email came. Did you see this? Yes. The customer service contact is on page 4 of the packet I sent you. His reply arrived almost immediately. You already know what they're going to say. Maybe I did. That wasn't the point anymore. Then you'll know what questions to ask after you call. Nothing came back. By Friday, Paige had tried twice. The first was a voicemail. Hey, it's me. My landlord is being ridiculous about the renewal language. Mom said you've seen stuff like this before. Call me. The second was a text. Seriously? You're ignoring me over one mistake? One mistake. The phrase sat there like the urn had tripped. No response went out. Every refusal produced the same physical reaction. A tightening beneath my ribs. A restless urge to correct, arrange, smooth, finish. At work, I had spent years teaching people that discomfort after setting a boundary did not automatically mean the boundary was wrong. Apparently, I had assumed that principle applied only to other people. The scholarship dinner was 4 days away when Mom tried a different route. She sent a photograph of the printed programs. The cover had Grandma's name in cream lettering over a picture of her garden. They look beautiful. Thank you for everything you've done. For a moment, warmth moved through me. Then another message appeared. Can you also confirm the seating for the Hastings table? I think Grace mixed up 2 names. There it was, the thank you and the assignment, stacked one after the other. My reply was brief. I'll verify anything already included in my event responsibilities. Nothing outside that. Mom answered, You don't have to keep saying it. I stared at that sentence. She was right about one thing. Eventually, I wouldn't. The dinner took place on a Saturday evening in a restored brick hall near the river. I arrived early, not because Mom asked, because the scholarship recipients deserved an event that worked. Grace stood near the registration table with 2 clipboards and the expression of someone who had already solved 3 problems before 5 o'clock. Caterers here, she said. Projector works. Both students checked in. Good. She tapped the binder under her arm. And I have the handoff copy. After tonight, it's yours. Grace smiled. Terrifying. You'll be fine. June appeared a few minutes later, carrying the framed photographs we had chosen. Grandma laughing on my porch. Grandma beside a row of peonies. Grandma at a church picnic, wearing sunglasses too large for her face. None of the pictures showed the work of caring for her. That didn't bother me anymore. The work had happened whether anyone photographed it or not. Mom arrived in navy silk. Dad wore the same charcoal suit he wore to almost every formal event. Paige came in 15 minutes later. She glanced at me once across the room. Neither of us approached the other. For most of the evening, everything went exactly as planned. Guests ate. The 2 scholarship recipients spoke. One young woman talked about being the first person in her household to attend college. Grandma would have loved her. That thought surprised me with its tenderness. For a while, I forgot about the house entirely. Then Mom walked to the microphone. She thanked donors, thanked volunteers, thanked the church. Her voice was warm and practiced. She spoke about Grandma's belief that people were responsible for one another. Nothing about that was untrue. Then Mom looked toward our table. Ruth always wanted what mattered to stay together. My shoulders tightened. She continued, "We've had a difficult few weeks, as grief sometimes makes people say and do things they regret." A few heads turned toward Paige. Mom moved past it quickly. "But I'm grateful that Megan has agreed we'll handle Ruth's wishes, including questions about the house, privately as a family." For half a second, all I heard was the faint feedback hum from the speakers. She had done it again. Not accused me. Not demanded anything outright. She had simply placed an agreement in my mouth and announced it to a room full of witnesses before I could object. Years earlier, I would have stayed seated. Not because I agreed. Because correcting Mom in public would have felt worse than swallowing the lie. She knew that version of me very well. The program continued. Mom finished her remarks to polite applause and stepped away from the microphone. No one gasped. No one leaned toward me dramatically. That almost made it more effective. A false statement delivered calmly could settle into a room before anyone realized it needed examining. 5 minutes later, Grace introduced me to thank the volunteers. Walking toward the microphone, my legs felt heavier than they had any right to. June caught my eye from the second table. She did not nod, did not encourage me, did not give me permission. Good. I didn't need permission. The microphone was cool beneath my fingers. "Thank you to everyone who helped tonight," I said. My voice sounded normal. That helped. Grace coordinated more moving pieces than anyone here will ever know, and June kept our volunteers from staging a revolt over the parking assignments. A few people laughed. The tension in my shoulders loosened by half an inch. Then I looked toward the tables. There are also a few facts I need to correct, because my name was attached to them tonight. The room quieted. My home was purchased by me, with my savings and mortgage, more than a year before my grandmother moved in. Mom shifted in her chair. I continued. Grandma Ruth never owned the property, and she did not fund its purchase. Paige looked down. I have not agreed to transfer the house, negotiate its ownership, or handle that question privately on anyone else's terms. Mom's mouth tightened. Those were the only facts I needed about the house. No screenshots, no text messages, no humiliation, just the record. The scholarship program will continue. After tonight, Grace and June have the materials needed for the next cycle. Separately, I'm also completing a 30-day transition of personal administrative work I've been handling for relatives. Someone at a back table shifted a chair. Mom spoke before I could finish. "Megan, this is not the place." Her voice carried even without the microphone. There it was. The old rule. Public space belonged to the person telling the acceptable version. I looked at her. "The place became relevant when you announced my agreement here." Dad lowered his eyes. Mom stood. "The person who can handle something should help keep the family together." She had said versions of that sentence all my life. At 27, it sounded like confidence. At 41, I finally heard the bill attached to it. "Being able to handle something doesn't make it mine," I said. Then I thanked the scholarship recipients again, and stepped away from the microphone. No applause followed. I was grateful for that. Applause would have turned it into a performance. This wasn't one. It was a correction. The dinner continued. That mattered too. No one stormed out. Nobody overturned a table. Dessert was served. The students took photographs with donors. A 73-year-old committee member asked me whether the coffee was decaf. Life refused to become cinematic just because something important had changed. Near the end of the evening, Mom found me in a small side room where I was packing the last vendor receipts into Grace's binder. Dad stood behind her. Paige came in a few seconds later. Mom shut the door. "You humiliated me." I slid the receipt envelope into its pocket. "I corrected something you said about me. You could have talked to me afterward. You could have talked to me before telling a room I'd agreed to something. You knew what I meant." "No. Megan, please stop pretending you don't understand normal human conversation." There was a time that sentence would have pulled me into defending my personality. Too literal, too exact, too rigid. Instead, I reached into my tote bag. The transition folder landed on the small folding table. Mom stared at it. What is that? The responsibilities I told you were being transferred. I already saw your email. This has the contacts, renewal dates, and handoff information. She opened it. The first section was Dad's insurance, then household maintenance, then service renewals, then tax organization, then recurring appointments and vendors. Her pages turned faster. This is ridiculous. Dad looked over her shoulder. How many pages is that? 11. Paige frowned. 11 pages of what? Mom shut the folder. Fine. Paige can handle it. Paige looked at her. Handle what? The question hung there. For the first time all evening, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was so complete. The person who had spent years benefiting from the system had no idea what the system required. Mom pushed the folder toward her. This. Paige didn't touch it. I don't know anything about Dad's insurance. Neither did I before I learned, I said. She looked at me. What am I supposed to do with all this? Whatever Mom just volunteered you to do. Her face flushed. You're enjoying this. No. And I meant it. There was nothing enjoyable about discovering how much of my adult life had been built around preventing the people in that room from being inconvenienced. Dad picked up the folder. Can we at least go through it together? You have 30 days. Megan. Everything you need is in there. Mom shook her head. You're really going to reduce us to a spreadsheet? No. The spreadsheet is what I was doing. Your people. That's why the work should belong to the people whose lives it manages. Nobody answered that. Grace knocked a minute later, because the venue manager needed my final signature on the catering closeout. The conversation ended because ordinary work still existed. That, more than anything, helped me leave. 3 days after the dinner, the locksmith arrived at my house. His name was Eric. He asked whether I had lost a key. No. Break in? No. He waited. I appreciated that he didn't ask again. Just changing access. Easy enough. The old cylinder came out of the front door in less than 15 minutes. The back door took longer because the frame had settled slightly. I stood in the hallway, listening to the metallic click of tools. Mom's old key was not being erased from history. Dad's wasn't either. They had once been given access because Grandma lived with me and emergencies were possible. That reason had ended. The permission had somehow remained. Until now. When Eric handed me the new keys, they felt strangely light. I sent one message to Mom and Dad. The locks have been changed. Old keys no longer work. Please contact me before coming over. Mom replied, This is unnecessary. Dad wrote nothing. I placed the spare key in the kitchen drawer instead of on the hook near the pantry. The hook stayed empty. For the remaining weeks, the requests slowed, not stopped. Slowed? Dad called once about a tax organizer. Mom emailed, asking where she had stored a home warranty document. Both answers already existed in the transition packet. I referred them there. Paige sent a text about her lease. That one received no answer at all. The regional lead application remained open on my laptop during those weeks. Twice, I nearly closed the tab. The job required travel. Travel meant not being nearby. Not being nearby meant an emergency might happen without me. That old logic sounded less noble after the transition folder. An emergency could happen without me, even if I lived across town. I had simply trained everyone to call me first. So one evening, instead of checking whether Mom had found the warranty document, I spent 40 minutes updating my resume. The final transition day arrived on a Wednesday. Nothing about the morning felt ceremonial. Coffee, traffic, a meeting about an overtime complaint, lunch at my desk. At 4:15, Dad called. I watched his name appear. For a few seconds, I considered letting it go. Then I answered, Hi, Dad. Hey, I'm looking at this policy renewal. Okay. It says I need to select a new plan option before Friday. Okay. He waited. So did I. Finally, he said, Can't you just handle this one? The request was almost gentle. That made it harder. My transition PDF was saved on the desktop. I opened it. Page 7 has the customer service number and the renewal deadline. I saw that. Good. You already know which option we usually choose. I know which option you chose last year. Megan. There was exhaustion in his voice. Maybe frustration. Maybe something else. I didn't assign a meaning I couldn't prove. It would take you 5 minutes. The sentence nearly broke me. Because he was probably right. 5 minutes. 10 at most. That was how the job had become 11 pages. Not one huge sacrifice. Thousands of tiny ones that were always easier for me to do than for anyone else to learn. Dad, I meant the date. He was quiet. You really won't help? I already did. The information is on page 7. That isn't what I mean. I know. Another pause. Then he said, all right. The call ended. My hand stayed around the phone. The room felt too still. Every instinct told me to call him back. Explain the options. Walk him through the website. Make sure he didn't choose the wrong thing. Make sure Mom didn't blame him. Make sure nothing became unnecessarily difficult. My thumb even found his name. Then I put the phone face down on the desk. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Nothing happened. No disaster. No emergency. No proof that I was a terrible daughter. Just an unfinished task sitting in someone else's life. For years, I had thought setting a boundary meant saying no. It didn't. Saying no was the easy part. The boundary was what happened afterward. When guilt filled the space where my labor used to be, and I chose not to rush back in and make the feeling disappear. So I left the phone where it was. And let the silence belong to someone else. The silence lasted longer than I expected. Not from the house. From me. For the first week after the transition ended, my phone still made my body tense every time it rang. A text from Dad could pull my attention out of a meeting before I even read it. Mom's name on the screen made me brace for a problem I had not agreed to solve. Most of the time, the messages were ordinary. Do you remember which company serviced the furnace? Where did you put the tax organizer from last year? What was the name of the plumber? The answers were already in the transition packet, so that was where I sent them. At first, Mom replied to every reference with some version of the same complaint. You could have just told me. Or, this takes you longer than answering the question. That second one almost worked. She was right sometimes. Typing, page 4, home maintenance, took longer than typing the contractor's name. The efficiency argument had kept me trapped for years. It was always faster if I did it. Faster if I made the call. Faster if I filled out the form. Faster if I read the fine print. Faster if I remembered the date. Efficiency was useful at work. In a household, it could quietly turn into ownership. About 6 weeks after Dad's insurance call, he sent me an email with the subject line, "You'll appreciate this." Attached was an invoice. I opened it cautiously. A woman named Marlene Price had billed Mom and Dad for 12 hours of household administrative help that month. Appointment scheduling. Vendor follow-up. Document organization. Insurance correspondence. The total was a little under $1,000. A second invoice from a bookkeeper added several hundred more. Dad's message underneath said, between the two of them, we're running around $1,300 a month. I had no idea this was basically a part-time job. The sentence sat on my screen. For years, the work had been described as quick favors. Just a call. Just a form. Just check this. Just fix that. Now, there was an invoice. Not an emotional argument. Not my memory. A number. It was... I wrote back. 3 minutes later, another message appeared. Your mother says we can manage it. We'll just have to cut back on some things. That answer mattered. Not because I wanted them punished. Because it confirmed the consequence had edges without becoming a disaster. Mom and Dad were not going to lose their home. They had retirement income, Dad's pension, Social Security, savings. Their mortgage was nearly gone. They could pay for help. They simply could not pay for help and continue pretending everything else in their budget was untouched. A weekend trip they had planned got postponed. Mom canceled a kitchen update she had been talking about. And, according to a text Paige sent me 2 weeks later, the stream of temporary help flowing in her direction had narrowed too. Her message arrived on a Tuesday night. Can we talk? I almost ignored it. Then another came. This isn't about the urn. That was exactly why I answered. Hello? Paige did not bother with a greeting. Mom and Dad told me they can't help with the increase in my rent. That sounds like something you need to discuss with them. I did. Then why are you calling me? Because this is happening because of you. There it was. A familiar equation. Something became uncomfortable. My boundary became the cause. How is your rent increased because of me? They're paying strangers to do things you used to do. Yes. And now, suddenly, they have to cut back. Yes. You don't hear how insane that sounds. It sounds like they're budgeting. Paige gave a short, disbelieving laugh. They're choosing between us. No. They are. No. They're choosing what they can afford. You know what I mean? I do, that's why I'm answering carefully. Her breathing came through the speaker. Then she said, "You have an $800,000 house." The fact that she could return there after everything almost impressed me. My house is not the solution to your life. I didn't ask you to give it to me just now. You were getting there. You always do this. Do what? Make me sound ridiculous. I'm repeating the subject you brought up. That house is more space than you need. Not your decision. You don't even have kids. There it was. The next layer. Not grandma. Not grief. Not fairness. Need. Apparently my ownership became less valid if someone else could imagine using the rooms differently. Paige, I'm going to say this once. She went quiet. My house is not available to you. My income is not part of your housing plan. Mom and Dad's budget is not mine to manage. And I am not calling your landlord. You're unbelievable. Maybe. You don't care what happens to me. I care. I'm still not fixing it. That's the same thing. No, it isn't. She hung up. A few months earlier, that call would have ruined my evening. I would have replayed each sentence, drafted softer versions of what I should have said, wondered whether I was becoming harsh. That night, the guilt still came. It just did not get the final vote. I made dinner, watered the plants on the back porch, then opened the Regional Employee Relations Lead application. The posting had stayed in my inbox for almost 2 weeks. Tara had sent me one reminder, and then, true to form, left me alone. The position required travel 2 or 3 days a month, occasionally more. A year earlier, I would have stopped there. What if Dad needed help? What if Mom had a contractor problem? What if Paige had another housing crisis? What if someone needed me while I was 2 states away? That question had controlled more of my life than I wanted to admit. What if someone needed me? The better question was beginning to be, what if they did? Adults could need something without the need automatically becoming mine. I updated my resume, wrote the application, checked it twice, then submitted it before I could manufacture another reason to wait. A month passed. Then another. The scholarship committee sent a thank you card after the dinner. Grace had handled the next donor update without me. June told me the volunteers survived. Nothing collapsed. That detail stayed with me. Things changed. They became less convenient for some people, but they continued. One Saturday morning, Dad texted, "Would you meet me for coffee? Just me, no paperwork." I read the message 3 times. The last 2 words were almost funny. Okay. We met at a small place near Bird Park. Dad was already there when I arrived. One coffee sat in front of him. Nothing sat in front of the empty chair across from him. That mattered more than it should have. He had not ordered for me, had not decided what I wanted, had not placed a folder beside the cup. I ordered my own. When I sat down, Dad rubbed one thumb along the cardboard sleeve around his drink. "You look good." "Thank you. How's work?" "Busy." "The new position?" I applied. His eyebrows lifted. "You did?" "Yes." "That's great." For several seconds, we talked about the job. Not the family. Not Mom. Not Paige. My job. He asked what the travel looked like. Asked what the role actually involved. I answered carefully at first because I was waiting for the hidden request. None came. Eventually, Dad looked down at his coffee. "I owe you something." My shoulders tightened. "Okay. Not money." "I didn't think money." He nodded. "The night with your grandmother's urn." I waited. Dad took a breath. "I've replayed it." That was his claim. What mattered was what he said next. "At the time, I told myself I grabbed you because I was stopping a fight. That's what you told me." "I know." He looked toward the window. "I thought you were going to go after Paige." The urn was breaking. Everything was happening at once. His fingers tightened around the cup. But stopping you was easier. I said nothing. He continued. Paige was out of control. You weren't. My throat tightened. So you controlled me. Yes. One word. No excuse attached. Dad looked at me. I should have stopped her. The coffee shop suddenly seemed too loud. Steam hissed behind the counter. Someone laughed near the front window. A spoon hit ceramic. For weeks, I had imagined what I would say if Dad ever admitted that. Every version sounded better in my head. What came out was simpler. Yes. His face shifted slightly. I'm sorry. The apology did not erase his hand around my arm. It did not restore Grandma's ashes. It did not change the years he had allowed Mom's version of things to become the easiest version. But it was the first time he had named his own action without turning it into my reaction. That was something. Not everything. Something. Dad took another sip, then said, I didn't know how much you were doing for us. You never asked. I know. That answer came faster than I expected. He rubbed his thumb against the coffee sleeve again. Then, finally, after 41 years of being the daughter who could handle things, my father asked me the question Grandma had always remembered. How are you doing? My eyes dropped to the table. There had been a time when that question would have been enough to bring me running back. Proof that I mattered. Proof that someone finally saw me. Now, it hurt differently. Better, I said. Dad nodded. And still angry. He nodded again. I understand. You don't get to say that yet. His eyebrows rose. I almost smiled. Fair enough. We met again the next month. Then once after that, there were rules, though I never printed them. No errands. No paperwork. No carrying messages from Mom. No updates about Paige unless they directly affected me. The first time Dad started with, Your mother thinks, I held up one hand. If Mom wants me to know something, she can tell me. He stopped. That was the difference. Not perfection. Correction. Mom did tell me things. Mostly by text. Some were practical. Some were sharp. One afternoon, my cousin Beth sent me a message. Aunt Elaine told everyone at lunch that you basically abandoned them when they needed help. Do you want to tell me what actually happened? The chronology folder was still on my laptop. Old texts, closing records, the donor bio, Paige's messages. Everything needed to dismantle Mom's version line by line. For a moment, the temptation was enormous. Not revenge, vindication. I could send Beth enough material to make sure every cousin, aunt, and church acquaintance understood exactly who had lied about what. Then I remembered how much of my life had already been spent trying to earn the correct verdict from people who were not living it. So I answered, If you want to know something specific, ask me. I'm not campaigning for my own innocence. Beth replied a few minutes later. Fair. Did Grandma pay for any part of your house? No. Did you agree to give it to Paige? No. Okay. That's what I wanted to know. That was all. Mom could keep telling her version. The difference was that her version no longer had the power to send me back to work. By early spring, the regional lead decision came through. Tara appeared in my doorway, holding her phone. You checking email? Eventually. Check it now. I narrowed my eyes. You know something? No. But if you got it, I want to see your face. That is suspiciously specific. Open your email. So I did. The subject line began with, Offer. Regional Employee Relations Lead. For several seconds, I stared at it. The salary increase was good. The responsibilities were larger. The travel was exactly what had been listed. Nothing about the offer was miraculous. I had qualified for it before any of this happened. The only extraordinary part was that I had finally stopped arranging my life around hypothetical emergencies. Tara grinned. Well, I got it. I knew it. You literally just said you didn't. I lead. You should be more careful around an employee relations mediator. She laughed. I accepted the position that afternoon. My calendar changed slowly after that. A 2-day trip to North Carolina. A training session in Maryland. One Wednesday evening marked for a gardening workshop June had convinced me to try. Dinner with Dad once a month. Nothing scheduled automatically for Mom. Nothing reserved, just in case Paige needs something. One evening, June called while I was packing for a work trip. You sound busy. I am. Bad busy? I looked at the open suitcase on my bed. My work badge. A novel I might actually have time to read on the train. A small toiletry bag Grandma had given me years earlier. No, I said. It's finally my busy. Almost a year after the night Paige threw Grandma's ashes into the rain. I had a few people over for dinner. Nothing formal. June, Tara, 2 colleagues. Dad came alone. Mom had not asked to come. I had not invited Paige. That was not punishment. It was simply where things stood. Dad brought bread. Not a document. Not an insurance envelope. Bread. He stayed for 2 hours, helped carry plates to the kitchen, and left when everyone else started gathering coats. No one asked me to solve anything. By 9:30, only June remained. She stood by the back door, wrapping a scarf around her neck. You sure you don't want help with dishes? I've got them. She pointed toward the sink. That sounds suspiciously like something your mother would say. Get out of my house. June laughed. Then I remembered something. Wait! The kitchen drawer near the refrigerator still held the new spare key. It had been there since the locksmith changed the locks. Unused. For months, I had liked knowing nobody else had one. That had been necessary. But boundaries were not the same thing as walls. The key felt cool against my palm when I picked it up. June looked at it. What's that? Emergency key. Her expression changed. If you're comfortable having it. She didn't reach immediately. You sure? That question mattered. Not assumption. Not entitlement. Consent. Yes. June took the key. I'll guard it with my life. Please don't make it weird. Too late. She hugged me once and stepped outside. After the door closed, the house settled around me. The same craftsman. The same porch where Grandma had once sat under a red blanket. The same backyard where rain had carried away something I could never fully recover. My phone rested on the counter. No missed calls. No urgent message. No forms waiting for me to interpret. The dishwasher hummed. Rain tapped lightly against the kitchen window. A year earlier, that sound would have taken me straight back to the patio. For a moment, it still did. Then the memory passed. There were things I had lost that no boundary could restore. Grandma. Some pieces of what I believed about my mother. The old version of Dad I had wanted to trust without conditions. Whatever relationship Paige and I might have had, if fairness had not always been measured against what I could give her. Self-respect did not erase grief. It only stopped grief from becoming permission. The empty brass hook near the pantry was still there. I had never removed it. For years, a spare key hung from it, because Mom said family should always be able to get in. Now the hook was empty. The key was with someone I had chosen. That difference looked small from across the kitchen. It felt enormous. I turned off the light over the sink, locked the back door, then stood for a moment in the quiet. Nothing needed fixing. Nobody was waiting for me to absorb the consequence of a decision I hadn't made. The silence wasn't a warning anymore. It wasn't proof that somebody had stopped loving me. It wasn't the pause before the next emergency. It was just my house, my time, my life. I was home.